we're talking about this being the next big thing. I know that, like roughly 45 years ago, more or less, there was a big geothermal project up here.
Yes.
And was that related to this or
Kind of.
Okay.
Kind of. I'll cover that in the question and answer at the end, because it was ultimately a victim of a budget cut. But it heralded the thing. Basically, they were ahead of their time, is what happened. It was a brilliant idea. It's kind of the basis of one of the things that's coming down the pike as we speak. But it is, it was a victim of too ambitious is the wrong word. It was too far ahead of its time. Anyway.
Because I just happened to know the guy who was in charge of that, and his wife were friends of ours when they went to college.
Oh, yeah.
And unexpectedly saw his picture in the paper when we actually had a paper here.
Right.
And
right.
my husband said, "Look who's working here."
Exactly. No, it was a brilliant piece of science, and it just somehow, you know, step one when getting federal money is trying to figure out who knocks where the money.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you know, it's politics.
It's right and left arrows.
Oh, wonderful, perfect. Okay,
So we go with
let's go.
Faraday.
Well, let's go with you know what? Let's go with Paul.
Okay.
That's fine. Okay, so remember, first of all, it takes a ton of money to buy the fuel, and then it releases a whole bunch of carbon dioxide and Permian extinctions. And what happened was the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere increased sixfold, and you had, I think it was 85% of marine species, 70% of terrestrial species just rolled over and died. Because when you get that much CO2 in the atmosphere, you acidify the oceans, and yeah, there you go. But what if the steam were free? Wouldn't that be nice? And what if it did not result in the release of massive amounts of carbon dioxide? That would be mighty nice. So, welcome to classic geothermal energy. This is the geyser. It is a huge geyser field about 75 miles north of San Francisco. It's the largest geyser field on the planet currently used to produce electricity. They have, if memory serves, 18 power plants, 350 production wells, and they produce about 20% of the renewable electricity in the entire state. Yes?
We're not heading to Yellowstone.
No, with the Yellowstone, that's already a national park.
Right.
And that's touchy, but it would be great too. Yeah.
But doesn't the thermal fields, the geothermal fields from Yellowstone extend a lot further north and south than are actually in the national park?
Oh, a little bit, not so much as you might. The interesting thing, you can actually, when you buy age dating rocks, notice the progression of that hot spot starting in eastern Oregon, going under all of Idaho and winding up in northwest Wyoming over the last 18 or 20 years. So classic geothermal, you got steam, you got all this. It's been running for decades. It's still going strong. If you don't mind, I'm going to divulge from it just for you know, how we can help each other, since this is Rotary Club. What happens after decades and decades, this amount of steam that's being produced tends to go down because you don't get to return 100% of the steam to be reheated. And about 10, 20 miles away, there were a series of small towns. They had a terrible problem. Their sewage treatment plants, even with tertiary treatment, weren't quite able to get the treated water down to drinking water quality. And so they would put it in the local river, and every year they'd pay stupendous fines. And some bright person said, "Ooh, how would you like to turn that liability into a revenue source?" Ran a pipeline from these towns to the geysers, took this treated sewage, took it to the geyser, pumped it back in, and rejuvenated the geyser field. You gotta love it. Anyway, okay, so classic geothermal energy. The problem is this geyser stuff doesn't happen in a lot of places in the world. So, not only that, there's another problem. This is Sadi Carnot. He was an engineering officer in the French army immediately post-Napoleon. His father was one of Napoleon's favorite generals, so he was shunned by everybody. which gave him a lot of time to think, and essentially, he invented physical chemistry, okay? And an amazing guy, died at 36 in the institution, left one manuscript, which was, you know, basically Lord Kelvin got a hold of it, said, holy cow, this guy's brilliant, and added on to it. But anyway, one of the many things Carnot noticed is not all heat can be turned into useful energy. And the smaller the delta T between the working fluid, as it were, and the ambient temperature, the smaller the percentage of total heat that can be used to create energy. Bummer, or since I looked it up, as Carnot might have said, save them all. Okay? So, there's a partial solution. Binary geothermal. What you do is you bring the not quite hot enough water to the surface, run it through a heat exchanger. The fluid on the other side has a lower boiling point than the water. All of a sudden you spread the delta T again, and in certain cases you have an economically viable power plant. This is the North Coastal plant. It's about 25 miles north of Ridgecrest. Yes, sir.
So John, what's the other water? What's the other fluid?
There's a couple of them. The most common one is called organic Rankine fluid, and it's some sort of organic compound in the water that has the effect of reducing the boiling point.
Environmentally sound?
Oh, as long as you keep it in the pipes.
Yeah.
But that is the point. If you don't, I mean, what was the point? You know? Anyway, now, I will say, binary plants have an efficiency of like 10 to 13%. So it's always a struggle to make it work economically. Flash plants can get as high as 30%, a lot easier to make a buck, but we won't find it. So let's talk about where we are right now with geothermal, and you're gonna go, well, how come you're giving this talk, okay? This is a map of the United States with the inferred temperature about 4 miles below the surface. And you'll notice Nevada is the center of the Basin and Range province, it's there. Notice in Texas, there's a band along the coast of Texas that goes into Louisiana. And then, of course, see that great big thing going up the middle of the continent? That's the Rio Grande Rift.
Yep.
And by golly, you know what? When they did the state boundaries, if New Mexico's boundary had been 30 miles west, we would have had the largest copper deposit in the United States. However, they missed that one, but they got this one good.
Well, didn't we used to have it? Because in Mexico and Arizona, it used to always be New Mexico.
Yeah, but that was before copper got to be a real going concern.
But on the copper point,
Yes.
Montana, where the capital is, a fight between two copper barons,
Yep.
isn't a good part of Montana a Superfund site? Because copper's pretty nasty.
Well, copper's a lot less nasty than, say, arsenic or selenium.
Okay.
Or cadmium.
You're right, I did take
But-
copper today to balance off every 3 days worth of zinc,
There
but
you
I
go.
did not
Yeah.
take arsenic.
Okay, well, and I suspect that was a wise decision.
Thanks.
Now, at the moment, there's 31 geothermal power plants in the US. Collectively, they produced about 0.4% electric power. Except, bear with me for a minute, because you're gonna see that things are in the early stages of changing beyond measure. How is geothermal energy expanding? First of all, it's expanding up the temperature scale. It's expanding, and this is critical, down the temperature scale. Because it's expanding down the temperature scale, it's expanding laterally geographically in places it hasn't gone before. It's moving into different applications, HVAC, we're going to talk a lot about that, agriculture, military, hydrogen production, and has anybody here ever heard of these things called data centers?
Yes.
Holy mackerel. Yes, okay. And what they're doing is they're adapting oil field drilling techniques that have been created over the last 35 years into geothermal. You have to do some different things, but those are proving to be invaluable. So let's start with the HVAC, okay? Ground source heat pumps. Everybody heard of a ground source heat pump? Anybody? Yes, okay, heard of ground source heat, okay. Basically, once you get several hundred feet below the surface of the earth, the temperature stays within a degree or two all year long, okay? So as it happens, if you can get down there and get the heat brought up to the surface.
If I could interrupt you.
Yeah.
In South Africa, because the gold mines go so deep,
Yes,
they actually put iced feed into the rock hammers, rock water. The
right?
biggest ice making machines in the southern hemisphere are a mile underground.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, the conditions they're mining are barely livable.
They are very
Yes,
livable. I
yes.
believe the rock wall temperature can get to 80 centigrade.
Oh, yeah, it's just awful. Yes.
I've heard of heat pump systems with homes, but I didn't realize it had to go deeper than about 4 feet to.
Well,
make
you
those
need
systems
to
work.
get deep enough where the temperature is reasonably stable, and where you have a big enough reservoir of temperature, as it were, to make this work all year round, year after year, okay? So it can be, you'll notice some people, if you have a pond nearby, you might be able to use that. Some people will do the classic, go out with a looped collector or so forth. The classics that we see in this part of the country are typically go down because the water table is not 4 feet or even 40 feet, it's quite a bit low. Okay? And the neat thing about this is the upfront cost is greater, but over the life cycle, it is actually already economically competitive with, and in many cases cheaper than, the alternative, which is running electricity, running natural gas. I have a professor at UMass, when I gave this talk last November, he was in the process of installing one of these at his home in the hills above Amherst. And I got an email from him the other day, he said, yeah, you know, it's been running for a few months, my electricity bill has dropped by 2/3. So you do the math over the years and all of a sudden, wow, that's great. Okay? But it's not just, and in fact, it's not mostly for housing. This is Colorado Mesa University, it's in Grand Junction, Colorado, and starting in 2007, they decided, you know what, let's do a campus-wide ground source heat pump system on a commercial basis. It's currently about 70% installed. They expect to have the rest in the next 3 to 4 years. Since its inception, it saved them about $12 million. I have to tell you, if somebody said to me, could you use $12 million, I would probably be hard pressed to turn it down. And of course, the college is thrilled because with all the other costs they have to deal with, this is wonderful. In addition, the state of Denver is so thrilled with this, they are now looking to use it for some of the larger public spaces in Denver itself. And you can actually do this in cities. There's a concerted effort going on in parts of Manhattan to use this, which is where you even put the dam highly fractured because that's how the water moves around. Okay, and yeah, and it's working very well indeed. Yes, indeed.
And so if you keep drilling these holes over all these cities and things like that, aren't you creating sinkhole potential and all that kind of stuff?
No, what you're doing is you have a fluid in the loop that stays in the loop. You typically don't want to pull the water in the ground out. So you're just using it as a heat source. And the fluid that's going down and up and down and up is the one that's transferring the heat energy from the ground to the house or college or public space or whatever. Yes.
So when you say they saved $12 million, is that net?
Net over that period.
Yes, but I mean, that takes into account the expense of building and maintaining this?
Right, exactly. Yeah,
Okay.
over the life cycle.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
Yes. Now, I should tell you, my whole career, I've been a consultant. I'm setting you up in this next slide. Decarbonization of the built environment. Let's all try and say that together. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Decarbonization of the built environment. Anytime I can get a 6-syllable word in, I figure I'm going. Okay. But what's going on is, according to the International Renewable Energy Agency, heating and cooling account for 40% of global energy-related carbon dioxide emissions. I gotta say, I think that's a little high, but it's probably a third. So, quick trick question, what's the best way to take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere? Anybody?
Trees.
Trees. Don't put it there in the first place. Exactly. Yes. Yes. So if you could knock out a third of the usage just by putting these in, now, it would be a global scale, you're talking probably 50 to 100 years to implement at a scale that makes that difference. But wow, wouldn't that be nice? And by the way, data centers not only have their electricity hogs, let's face it, but they have huge cooling needs, because you have tens or hundreds of thousands of laptops, I'm oversimplifying greatly. And they're all putting out heat, and you get that cumulative heat, and it very quickly throws all the electricity off because the temperature gets out of control. So basically, these ground source heat pumps are perfect for this kind of application, okay? And they will enjoy correspondingly huge savings, which they can pass on to the consumer. But regardless, there you go.
Are we talking about capturing the heat from these computers?
No, we're talking about bringing up cooler temperatures from the subsurface to cool
To
everything
cool
off.
the space,
So it
as
doesn't-
opposed to letting that heat rise, squeeze it, and make something out of it.
And my guess is somebody's looking into that as we speak, because there is a whole lot of work going on. That's right. Yeah.
And here's the lab.
No.
Actually, the lab does have a small geothermal program, and, they are, well, I'll get into that later, but yeah. So, what else? You remember I mentioned agriculture, okay? This is the Mason Farms greenhouse in Radium Springs, California. By the way, Radium Springs, a spectacular case of disaster in rebranding. Have you been to Radium Springs? Anybody? Okay, yeah. Exit 19 off of I-25, just north of Las Cruces. Okay, what happened, they have hot springs, they have spas, they want to bring people in. This was 1920s. Everybody thought radium was great. Just in time for, of course, physicians and toxicologists discover radium is one of the poisonous things known to humankind. But I guess they didn't have enough money to rebrand it once. So there you go. There's, by the way, no radium in Radium Springs whatsoever. It's been tested repeatedly. But basically, they have about 1 million square feet under roof at this. It is a big freaking greenhouse. And they have 3 wells a couple of 100 yards off the property, drilled to 800 feet where the water is 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Bring that up, run it through a heat exchanger. You know, basically the hotter you can make a greenhouse up to a critical level, faster they grow, more luxuriantly they grow, more money you make, more money you save by not having to pay for the oil or gas or whatever to heat the greenhouse, and they make a ton of money. Yes?
No, I was gonna say, very cool.
Yeah.
What are they growing? Flowers?
All kinds of things. As I recall, poinsettias are big, but, you know, but they're kind of a once-a-year crop, so.
We know about that.
Yes. But anyway, but they actually do have tours in here, if you're ever down that way and wondering what to do with yourself.
And potential to expand?
Yeah, they've still got room, and they, you know, I mean, as it is, you bring up 140 degrees, you gotta cool it off before you expose the plants to it, you kill it. So, yeah, you got plenty of room to expand. Now, this next one is really clever because it's not obvious. Basically, everything I mentioned so far, it has to be commercially viable, okay? Next one. Military bases, yes. What do military bases, by the way, this is Nellis Air Force Base in North Las Vegas. I'm told it's the largest Air Force base in the country. I have no idea. That's true. But what do they use a lot of? Electricity. They gotta have electric radars, radios, you know, all this stuff. If you're a terrorist who wants to shut down a base for a while, but you're a cowardly terrorist, don't really want to die, the safest thing to do would be, you know, you would think so.
Not the suicide bombs.
Is to go 10 or 20 miles out of town, find where the regional high voltage lines are coming in, blow a couple miles worth of towers. They're out of business for a long time. Okay, so the Air Force is well aware of this, and they are looking to see, can we put in geothermal systems under the base itself, where we already have all kinds of guards with large guns and no sense of humor. I get to work at military bases and Nevada test sites and so forth over the years. So, and it turns out the beauty of this is, from a commercial standpoint, is it doesn't have to be economically competitive. It just has to make enough electricity to work because it's the safety you're going for. How about that? And in fact, Baker Hughes, the big oil field service company, has seen the light on geothermal. They've got a rapidly growing geothermal division, and that division's been hired by the Air Force to do a pilot study at 3 Air Force bases in Texas. You remember that strip along the coast? Yep, they're doing that as we speak, yes.
So how long has this been in place?
Oh, it's not in place here yet at all.
Oh.
This is in the very early, this is why I'm saying it's the next big thing, because they're, you know, they're looking at it going, yeah, maybe we should not wait until they build the tower as before.
Okay, thank you, sorry.
No. So now we're gonna switch to New Mexico, okay? This is a picture of Lightning Dome. Now, remember I said there's 31 geothermal plants in there. New Mexico only has one of them. It's Lightning Dome, okay? It's about 15 miles southwest of Lordsburg. It's in the Boot Heel of New Mexico. I've actually been here. It's not the end of the earth, but you can see it from there. It is about 3 miles east of a tiny hamlet with the grandiose name of Cotton City. So now cotton takes spectacular amounts of water to grow. I mean, that's why, you know, I actually did a tour of Egypt, which was amazing a couple of years ago. The Nile is incredible. You go, this is why they grew cotton. You have all this water. So crocodiles, yeah. Anyway, so these folks were out here, they had a ranch, and they were like, yeah, we should grow some cotton. So they, around 1948, they drilled down the well a few hundred feet, said, okay, let's pump it up, stuck their hand in, whoa, that's too damn hot for the cotton. The thing about this is, it's a blind deposit. Some geothermal systems, due to historic activity, if you're a trained geologist, you can actually see that, you know, hints that there's a geothermal system. This has none of that whatsoever, okay?
What could be a hint? I mean, would give you a clue.
I'll give you a hint from a place in New Mexico,
Yes.
okay? There are sedimentary beds that built up over the last 500,000 years. They have layer after layer of opal in them, and you can see where, you know, basically the opal was injected into their surface. It was carried up by groundwater. Okay. The thing about opal is it drops out of solution and solidifies when the temperature drops to 300 degrees Fahrenheit. So the water bringing it up must have been hotter than 300 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, that's one of a number of examples. Okay.
There's a lot of mining for opal in Australia.
Yeah, that's because they have those. This isn't like gem quality opal, but it's like, well, it could be gem quality geothermal. But no, you're absolutely right.
Would that mean perhaps that Australia could power its entire continent on geothermal?
Potentially, you'd have to see it. I'll get to it in a minute. You'll have to see, you know, where is it relative to where you need it. Okay. So basically, somebody put the money into setting up a geothermal power plant here in, I think it was 2013 they started, and their wells went down a few thousand feet. And unfortunately, the combination of relatively low temperature, by relatively low, I mean, it would still scald you instantly, but not high enough to be, and not having really a lot of flow through when you're pumping it out. And it was just losing money regularly. And however, right next door, there is a thriving tilapia fingerling farm. Yes, there really is, which you cannot tour because basically it's set up in old greenhouses from the previous operation. And they are set up to be completely sterile. And they're sold for research in addition to lunch and dinner. So, yeah. So there's that. However, last November, excuse me, not last month, February of 24, a startup company called Zanstar bought Lightning Dome. And last November, they drilled the well down to 8,000 feet. Okay, oh, that's nothing. I mean, you know, oil field wells,
Compared to
they can get as deep as 40,000 feet.
80.
Yeah, so 8,000, I mean, 8,000, yeah, it's a way, it's a hole, it costs a lot of money. But anyway, but this, you're going like, oh, that's nice, but that's a bunch of dots. Yes, it is a bunch of dots. The vertical scale is temperature. You're getting hotter as you go from bottom to top. The horizontal scale is how much flow can we get out of these wells per minute in terms of thousands of gallons per minute. It goes up to around 5,000, as you can see. And each of these wells that's plotted on here is from an existing binary geothermal power plant in the United States, okay? And this new well that Zanskar drilled is that little yellow dot with the black circle in the upper right-hand corner. New Mexico now has, as of 6 months ago, the biggest invest binary geothermal well in the United States. And now they've got a different problem, okay? Which is, remember, it's not the end of the world, but you can see it from there. Nobody lives there. So you gotta get the electricity someplace else. They've actually retrofitted the plant. They've actually started the advanced operation, I think, this last month. And now they're producing more electricity than they have a capacity to transmit to, say, Tucson. Yeah.
Wow.
But you gotta, it's a nicer problem to have.
Yes.
Let's put it that way, okay? So, yeah.
And then transportation, is that a problem? I mean, is it
Well,
difficult to say the long distance or not?
Well, the thing is, of course, you're gonna use these high tension lines because since it's on a military base, the chances of, you know, terrorists going on is pretty minimal. But I'll give you an example. You may have heard Pattern Energy back in 23 got permission to put in the largest single wind farm in America. Now, Texas, in terms of total capacity, is an order of magnitude greater than anybody else put together. But eastern New Mexico is a great place to live. If you ever drove from Klein's Corners down to Roswell, what do you see? Windmill. Okay. They are putting in 926 windmills. And then they are building a 500-mile high voltage transmission line from there to Tucson, okay? They raised $11 billion. Half of that, $5.5 billion, went to procuring and installing and hooking up the windmills. The other $5.5 billion went to put in 500 miles of transmission, about $1 billion per 100 miles, which is a lot. Yes.
I have a question. I read, and this is several years ago, and this is kind of an off-the-wall question, but I read that, that in the desert,
Yeah.
there's lots of sand.
It's a,
And of course, sand gets heat from the sun and becomes very hot.
Yep.
And that there was ways theoretically to extract the heat from the sand to use as an energy source.
Possibly. The thing is, you want it, if you're not gonna make electricity, the question is, how do you get that energy that you've created to someplace where you need it?
Yeah.
Because one thing deserts don't tend to have is lots of people. So, you know, it could work if you could figure out how to move that heat from one place to another.
So, take a pause. Everyone please stand. We'll do the four-way test, and then anyone who wants to stay for the rest of Tom's talk, will do that.
How much of Tom's talk are we missing? I mean, would it be worth Tom coming again?
35 minutes?
This is slide 15 of 20.
Okay.
And slide 20 is thank you, so.
Okay, so everyone quickly stand. Of the things we think, say, or do, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? Okay? Please stick around for the rest of this. Cool. Okay.
So, Zanskar, we're happy. Okay, now, here's the thing. For a classic geothermal power plant, you need three things. First of all, you need it to get hotter really quick with depth, okay? There's parts of the United States where you go down 4 miles, you're still at like 180 degrees Fahrenheit, big warp. So you need to be in places where it gets hot and hurt with death. Second thing you need is a means of getting that heat to the surface, and traditionally what we've used is groundwater. There's actually a place in east central Arizona where they were thinking of using carbon dioxide, but it hasn't proven out yet. It may someday, and there's advantages to it, but so far no. And then finally, you have to have a means, you have to have effective porosity. Porosity are these little holes or cracks or both in the rock that allow water to move from one place to another. And you need enough of them that are big enough that the water can move to your extraction well faster than you need it at the surface, okay? And if you're missing even one of these three, you're not gonna have classic geothermal. However, enhanced geothermal systems, basically EGS gets rid of the need for two of these techniques. You still need to get hot and hurry, but what you do is you drill borings down into this rock that doesn't have much porosity, you get to the right depth, you frack between the borings, and then you add water down some of the borings, bring it back up the other. As it's migrating through these fractures, it's picking up heat like you can't believe. This is currently being done in Southwest Utah by Fervo Energy at their Cape Station project, and they now have power purchase agreements with Southern California Edison. I know a guy who specializes in funding geothermal projects and raising them. He said, if you can get power purchase agreement in place, the various venture capitalists will beat each other over the head with their briefcases to be first in line to give you money. So this is a big deal. It's being heavily subsidized by the US government, but it looks like they've come up with adapting the oil field drilling techniques to the point that it's going to be impact. So very quickly, we've got 3 more slides. This one, no one can read this one. Sorry.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
About the oil field?
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Does it matter what size the oil field is or anything like that?
What size the boring is?
Well, I'm
or-
just saying, does any kind of drilling area work, or are there limitations on some of those?
You want it to get hot in a hurry. You need it to be a big enough area that gets hot that you can make enough power to be attractive to someone who put in these insanely expensive things. Oh, quick mention while we're at it, these high voltage lines, they've always been made with a steel core that carries the in an aluminum sheath. There's currently research that's in the either bench scale or whatever comes after bench scale, using different materials that can transmit twice the amount of electricity per line as our traditional ones. That's especially nice because basically, you remember Pattern Energy? It took them 17 years to get all the permits to build that thing. Okay? If all you gotta do is go up there and replace the lines, you need comparatively almost no permits at all, and now you have twice the capacity. So that's a very exciting, it's not directly related to geothermal, but if that proves out, that's gonna be a major help in getting electricity working.
So the little farmer with one little drill, people aren't really interested in, I'm talking about sort of cleanup ideas, where you maybe take over a huge area and convert it and be geothermal.
Oh, yeah.
oily, and that
Yeah.
would be good.
You have to have a lot of heat, you have to have someplace where you can get that water, and that's a whole separate topic. But, yeah, conceivably, yeah. So, I apologize, no one can read this slide, but basically what it's saying is, over the life cycle of a project, the least expensive right now is kind of a tie between solar and wind. Okay?
And
Pardon?
between solar and what?
Wind. Above it are tied natural gas and geothermal. Okay. Now this slide was made a couple of years ago, and if in fact the Fervo drilling techniques bear out, geothermal is going to go down a lot closer to wind and solar. Plus, what this analysis leaves out is the fact that how much, let me ask a question, how much electricity do you get out of a solar plant at 2 AM? You don't get it, okay? How much do you get out of a wind farm on the day that where it's not blowing? None, okay. So you wind up having to install these huge battery, and by huge, I mean a couple of times the size of this building, battery facilities, which cost an arm and a leg to store, to store up, if you're producing more than you need, you store the extra. That's not factored into this equation. Geothermal, 24/7, 365, just make sure in 50 years you can bring in some more water. So, there you go.
Wind,
Yep.
solar, natural gas, geothermal, and you're saying,
Geothermal is going to be growing, it may not quite get to wind and solar, but when you figure it's the perfect base load because it works all the time, that's an advantage all by itself.
And you're using your oil field areas, I mean, I think that's, you're offering an alternative to
Yeah,
oil
yeah,
and gas.
yep,
So can the geothermal field
yep.
change?
Oh, yeah, yeah, over time.
Can it move?
Forgive me, is everybody here from the state of New Mexico? State land office, good. Okay, state land office, the regulations say, yes, well, you can put in geothermal if you think it'll work, but you cannot degrade the heat resource. And we sit there going, well, excuse me, when we do oil fields, do we say you can't take any oil out?
Yeah.
So, so it's, and by the way, they're aware of this and they're working to fix it, they're very
They're
aggressive,
rewriting
which is
the
why.
on that, and you were just in Hawaii.
Yes.
Look at a map of Hawaii. Look at Kauai.
Yeah.
The island's effectively shrinking, very slowly through erosion, right? But it's shrinking. Move along that chain, right, to Oahu, to Maui, Molokai and Maui, and you get to the Big Island. And what did we see this weekend? 10,000-foot lava geysers, right? That island is growing. What does that tell you? Even if you go out to Midway, where we fought World War II, is that it's not so much that source is moving, but the plates or the crust on top of it are kind of
That's
moving,
exactly
right?
right. The oceanic plates are migrating towards the Aleutian Trench.
Correct.
And you have a stationary heat source in the mantle that just
Yep.
keeps putting it out.
So
But very
the continents,
slowly,
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, you're not gonna notice it in a lifetime.
Yeah, so think of it that way, that, yeah, over a gazillion years,
it'll move
yeah,
to somewhere else.
yep.
Exactly,
Okay.
yep. Okay, so, in summary, for decades, geothermal was a niche industry, great idea, couldn't really work it. It's now in the early stages of accelerating into a vital source of increased electricity while at the same time reducing the amount of carbon dioxide that goes into the atmosphere, thanks to new uses, new techniques, and freedom from the shackles of needing nature to have provided the conditions you need, okay? I will tell you, I think the earliest millionaires in geothermal, are gonna be the ones with the ground source heat pumps. Because they're already economically competitive, you have a trained workforce that can do that. Water well drillers can do that, yeah.
So how far away are we from New Mexico government saying, okay, we're converting to geothermal?
Oh, they're doing that now. They actually, this year, they had a major push to revisit and upgrade the regulations under which you can do this kind of work. I was part of I wasn't part of working, well, yeah, I was part of it.
So what about the Permian Basin? I mean, that's where all the oil drilling is going.
Absolutely.
Can't see us getting that up quickly.
We won't, have to be given up eventually, either through probably a combination of depletion and a combination of, competition from solar, wind, geothermal for that.
And so the geothermal won't be in that area anyway.
Well, it probably will be, that's a whole debate about where's the best place in New Mexico to look, and that's a whole nother talk in itself, which I'm not quite ready.
All right, okay.
Anyway, so just because it's beautiful, there we go.
Yeah.
The end. You've been just a wonderful group, and I want to thank you so much. Yeah.
So I'm sure there's an algorithm for this, that it's not simple. But
He's sitting down.
I'm guessing up to a point,
Yep.
what's the size of the pipes that you're putting into the ground? Because I'm
So
guessing,
they're big,
okay.
they're much
And then
bigger.
is there a point in diminishing marginal return or, and that, so have they figured out an optimal pipe size?
And the answer, well, the answer is, it varies from place to place. It
Okay.
varies on how good your resource is.
Okay.
It varies on how quickly you can get there. Your typical oil well might be 8 inches, okay? Your typical geothermal well is gonna be 24 to 36.
Okay.
So it's, and it's because even though water has a great capacity to transmit, to capture heat, hold it, take it to another place, in terms of just calories that you have, petroleum and natural gas are still, they still have more. Yep.
And are we losing that water, or is that water still available for something else? I
Well,
know
you recycle
it, but
as
does
much
it
of
get
it as you
trashed on the
can.
way?
Yeah, I mean, basically, once you put it through the system,
Yeah.
you put it back in the ground through injection.
Okay.
You typically are gonna lose 1% or 2% per year.
But
Which
it's
is
not
why
getting
in a couple of
polluted.
decades, you better be looking around going, where do we get some more water? Hopefully somebody's got a problem with their sewage. Yeah.
But it's not getting polluted.
No, trust me. If you want to purify sewage, heat it to 400 degrees Fahrenheit.
I don't use sewage, I mean HVAC.
No, the HVAC, not always, but almost always, you drill these borings, you put tubing in the borings and run a fluid through the tubing
Right.
that gets the heat without coming in contact with the groundwater. Yeah. Yes,
So are heat pumps a good idea in Los Alamos and White Rock?
almost certainly not. This is one of the rare places, and why is that? Because where we're sitting right now, the water table for the regional aquifer is about 1,000 feet below us, maybe 1,100.
Rock.
It's a long way down.
And in rock.
It is, yeah. My favorite thing when I'm talking about the chromium plume
Yeah.
is I pull out a picture taken just above the 86-story observation deck on the Empire State Building, looking straight down to tiny little dots and stuff like that. That's how far we have to drill from right here just to get to the top of the regional aquifer. It's a long way down. And the further you drill, the more expensive it is. So this is one of the rare places where at the moment it's probably not cost effective.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being so patient with us.
Oh,
Trying to get
heavens.
everything
Listen,
working.
I had.
Please
twins.
repeat.
The number of times I spent on my knees on that tile bathroom floor reading Dr. Seuss, trying to induce potty training.
Are there sites on the Navajo Nation that are suitable for geothermal?
There probably are. That has not been investigated as thoroughly as other places. Is that true? No, it's true that there probably are. I'm trying to think. Parts of the Navajo Nation are in the San Juan Basin,
Right.
which is more of a natural gas basin than an oil basin. So there may well be places up there, but I'm not as familiar with those. I will say the state government is putting on a very significant outreach to the tribal nations to say, are there ways that this might work for you? Yeah, I have to say the current administration, I have a lot of admiration for. First of all, they're recognizing this is the coming thing, and they're trying many different ways to help New Mexico be in the vanguard.
We've got all the scientists here, you know, it's such a
Yes.
hub in that way that.
It's the highest concentration of dumbasses in the United States.
Do you know what the cost estimate would be to do something like that greenhouse in Radium Springs today?
Oh boy, I wouldn't even have a ballpark. What happened, it's been there for 40 years, they've grown it over 40, it didn't start as a million square feet of a foot or anything like that. So, they've grown it over time, but it's apparently always turning out top, and it tends to do better than its neighbors because it's cost to them. You know, next to labor, the next biggest thing is keeping it hot at night and in the winter, which is an issue with most business.
I mean, educating.
Local every year, all kinds of reasons why it didn't work.
Oh, Fenton Hill,
visiting town.
Yeah.
But, I've never heard anybody tell me what I'm thinking. What is the whole, they said,
They were trying to pioneer techniques which are only now understood well enough that we can control them to the point that they work in the
There's
first place.
fracking here a long time ago.
Yeah, I mean, they were probably the first place to ever frack anything. Yeah, and, you know, the fact is, it worked pretty well, but then the other thing is, and something, having spent a lot of my career as a contractor to various governments, don't annoy the people with the money. Somehow they got a foul for people with the money. That was part of the getting shut down thing.
Thank you, Tom.
Well,